And welcome everybody to the Dragon's Lair on Renegade Broadcasting. Hopefully my voice is back now. I caught some sort of a bug, gave me a little bit of fever, usual hacking, and when I hack, I always lose my voice. Hopefully it's 100%. We'll see. I'll try to do the best I can this evening, and I'll try to get as much across without playing as much music as I did last time. It is hard to talk for 2 straight hours. That's for sure. So anyway, tonight's show will be about Thomas Edison, Walt Disney, and the degenerate Jews in Hollyweird. I won't go through the description. Most of you have probably read it already. I want to go ahead and say let's give a listen to all the other hosts here on Renegade. I believe until further notice, it's Kyle on Mondays, to be determined, and or Wildcard Tuesdays with a guest host or a secondary show by one of the regular hosts, ? Will on Wednesdays, Mike on Thursdays, and Lou on Fridays, Roundtable Saturdays, and me, of course, on Sundays. And for the record, today is Sunday, February 24th, 2013, on our screwed up Christian calendar. Sun is at 14 degrees Pisces and conjuncting my 7th house in Descendants, which is a house of others and individual relationships and or partnerships. Neptune has been transiting in Pisces for a while. Is at roughly 2 to 3 degrees Pisces. The Sun made a conjunction with transiting Neptune this last week, and I'm sure it brought in a lot of confusion to many people's lives. Now, on Monday, Saturn went retrograde, and yesterday, Mercury went retrograde. Mercury, when it goes retrograde, it creates havoc for about 3 weeks. Expect delays in communication and general confusion about issues. Additionally, for me, I still have a solar arc Mars conjuncting my natal ascendant, as I mentioned last time, and will for a few weeks to come. I had some computer problems when Saturn went retrograde, but I was able to solve those. I almost lost one of my computers, but I'll know how to salvage it next time. It took me a little bit, but I figured it out. And just want to go ahead and mention that I'm going to do an astrology show in the very near future, as I've had a significant number of requests to do so. We are tentatively looking at the evening of Tuesday, March 5th, if Kyle does not schedule another show or Lou decides to switch his show days. I think I heard him mention the possibility of moving from Friday. Just FYI, Fridays are not good for me. So if that doesn't work out, something else would have to be considered. So that would be a week from this coming Tuesday. Again, I mentioned on my first show that if you could go to YouTube and watch Quantum Astrology, that would be great, and try to do it before listening to my show. Right before would be a good idea. I will not monitor the chat. I may glance at it during music breaks. We'll see. I'll be drinking my water and smoking where I'm at, so I won't need to take a break for that. If anything, it'll be to give my eyes a break and my voice a rest. We have a chat room at renegadebroadcasting.com or renegadebroadcasting.chatango.com, or you can go to the social network called alternativesocial.com. It's one that Kyle set up. My cat disappeared for a few days this week. Wondered if she was coming back or not, but she did. Surprised me around 3 a.m. Sunday morning, jumping in my lap without knowing she was even there. So we had a nice reunion, and she's sitting on the back of my chair right now. Hopefully she didn't get pregnant. Just what I need, more animals in this small house. Again, I don't have a personal website or a blog. I probably would not have a life if I did have one, so it's probably best that I don't. Now, if somebody wants to volunteer and do one for me, you're more than welcome. I will not be taking any calls for this show. There's a lot to discuss and a lot of information to get through. If you want to contact me, you can reach me at magus_18@geocities.com. That's MAGUS_18 at GEOCITIES.com. You can just write subscribe if you want to be on my e-list, or just write me in general. Can't guarantee I'll get to answering all emails. Something I did want to mention. I've been trying to hide something for a little while, but now that I'm on Skype, it's not really an easy thing to do. I've got some dental issues that I'm having problems with and have for several months. When I listened to my first show, I could tell, some of the words were not coming out quite right, and I also misspoke a few words as well too. That happens when you get tired, and your eyes get tired as well. It affects my voice only on certain words, but I just wanted to mention that to you, and I'm going to be dealing with it for a while until I can figure out a way to afford to solve the problem. It's a recurring problem I've had since I was 12 years old in the 5th grade, and every once in a while that dental work has to be redone. May have to go to Mexico to get it done at the prices that they have here. Anyway, I also noticed someone in a chat room had made a remark about perhaps I was reading too much. Well, on some subjects I can just talk away, and on the astrology show, that will be all just right off the top of my head. But a lot of this stuff you just can't remember at all. And this subject tonight's pretty detailed, and there's just no way anyone could remember all of the details involved. So anyway, before I get started, I'm going to play a song, but before that, I want to say that there are no illegal guns, only illegal gun laws. So I'm going to go ahead and play one more song, and we'll get on to the topic tonight. Okay, I'm back. We'll get into this. Let's discuss music first. My thoughts on music is this. If it sounds good, I like the way it sounds, I don't care. I don't care about the lyrics. There's all this gay references stuff. Yeah, that's true. It's there. It's obvious. And it's been going on for a long time. When I was growing up, there was Elton John. It wasn't really in his music, but it was in his image. And same with David Bowie. I saw a picture of David Bowie once. It's like, Jesus Christ, what is this? But anyway, my thoughts are this. I can't tell what most of the lyrics are anyway, and as long as it sounds good, I just really do not care. Now, there are quite a few Jews in a lot of rock bands. Geddy Lee of Rush, the bass player and the vocalist, and of course Neil Peart writes the lyrics. So that's where the real creativity of Rush truly comes from. Now, I don't know if some of you like Disturbed or not, but the lead singer for Disturbed is a Jew, and he's definitely pro-Zionist. If you're old enough, rather, you might remember Pat Benatar. Well, Pat Benatar is not her real name. Look it up on Wikipedia. She's a Jew. I liked her music. I had no idea she was ever Jewish until I just decided to just look into her and see what was going on. Hadn't heard from her in years. It's like, what is up with her? And by the way, take a look at a picture of her. She's definitely a Jewess, rather. But Jews, when they're young, you can't always tell they're Jewish. When they get old, there's no doubt. So anyway, there's a couple of other people. Two members of KISS are definitely Jewish. I don't know if all four of them are not, but KISS obviously was a big influence in the 70s with their get-up, the way they put on their makeup and their costumes, et cetera, and so they had a big influence on a lot of young people when I was growing up, and that's probably where it really got out of control, so to speak. Maybe that's not the best words, but it really started heavy at that point. And there's others who one might think is Jewish, but are not. Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails, no, not a Jew. His last name is real similar to Resnick, which is Jewish, but Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails is not. And another one is Marilyn Manson. And I have a few things to say about Marilyn Manson. Now, Marilyn Manson is not a Jew. Now, I did a little bit of research on Manson. Now, I'm going to cover him here for a couple of minutes. He was born. His mother went to an Episcopal church. His father was Catholic. He was born. His last name is Warner. Now, of course, we all know of Warner Brothers in the movie industry, and so I'm a little suspicious. But not every name is automatically Jewish by default. There's a lot of names that Jews have that Gentiles also have. Miller is one. There's a lot of Jews named Miller, and there's a lot of Millers who are not Jewish. And in some countries in Eastern Europe, that you have to actually be careful before you insinuate that someone is Jewish simply by their name alone. And so one thing that I really thought was rather interesting about Marilyn Manson, let's see, he was born, I was trying to find his first name here, I lost it. Anyway, he was born in Canton, Ohio. He was the only child of Barbara Warner, and her maiden name was Wire, and to Hugh Warner. Manson is of German and Polish descent on his father's side, and is a fourth cousin twice removed of conservative commentator Pat Buchanan, of all people. Yes, Marilyn Manson is related to Pat Buchanan. I decided to go to another site that's called Jew or Not Jew. And you can find out if someone is a Jew, and it's run by Jews, by the way. And here's his name right here, Brian Hugh Warner. And it says here, not Jew. Now, another thing I thought was interesting. I went over to, when I was doing a search, I saw something on Stormfront. And so I thought I'd go ahead and check this out. So I'm going to read this. It says, I'm curious as to people's opinion on Marilyn Manson, his music, his ideologies, and his life. On one hand, he is a degenerate. He uses drugs. He glorifies promiscuity. He has used homoerotic imagery in his videos. And by the way, he does it on stage as well, although he is heterosexual, and had a self-hating Jew for his keyboardist. On the other hand, he pays homage to National Socialism throughout his art, usually in subtle ways, but very frequently. He holds far-right views on most subjects, although he has a lot of contempt for Christianity. He has been vilified for speaking out against Jewish-run record labels, for his contempt of blacks, and frequently using Nazi imagery and salutes on stage. He is an avid collector of Nazi memorabilia, and was quoted as saying his biggest inspiration for his charismatic onstage personality was Adolf Hitler, which is easy to see if you have ever been to one of his concerts. An interesting thing I read was that on his album called The Golden Age of Grotesque was that there was a hidden meaning in two of the songs. In the album's namesake song, The Golden Age of Grotesque, he sings the line, "It's a dirty word, Reich, say what you like." In another song, "This is the new shit," he sings, "And you motherfucking ready for the new shit?" It says, "Are you motherfucking ready for the new shit?" "Stand up and admit, tomorrow's never coming. This is the new shit. Stand up and admit." Apparently the hidden meaning is that in the dirty word, Reich, say what you like, is meant so that in the next song, shit can be exchanged for Reich, giving the song a whole new meaning. Are you motherfucking ready for the new Reich? Stand up. Admit tomorrow's never coming. This is the new Reich. Stand up and admit. Having seen this song performed live and seeing the way his flag dropped in the background as he screamed the verse, I do not doubt this interpretation. His flag is very similar to a Kriegsmarine flag with a single SS bolt turned into an arrow in the center. There is also, though, the issue of his background. His real name is Brian Warner. Although he comes from an Episcopalian Christian family, it strikes me as a possible Jewish name. And yes, he's right. I would like to hear people's opinion on Manson, keeping in mind that a lot of you have heard about it, the things about the lies that he talks about on Christianity. This guy's obviously a Christian, so I won't go into that any further. But anyway, I thought that was rather interesting. Marilyn Manson is not a Jew and appears to be possibly a National Socialist. So let's get back to the topic itself here. I've covered Pat Benatar, Rush, Disturbed, Marilyn Manson, Trent Reznor, and Kiss. Okay, let's move on to TV and the movies here. A lot of you are pretty young, but you may remember in reruns at least some of these shows. Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Dukes of Hazzard. Well, those shows make fun of white people. And, I'm being white, I can certainly laugh at my own people, but who is it coming from? That's the key. Now, if another group is making fun of us, well, that's not really a good idea, not in my opinion. Now, if we can laugh at ourselves, sure, let's go for it. But anyway, these shows are still in rerun. Did I mention Dukes of Hazzard? Yeah, I think I did. So anyway, I just want to mention those shows in particular. Now, what I've got here is I've got a couple of essays, and I'm going to read to you tonight. One is called Thomas Edison and the Jews. So I'm just going to go ahead and just get right into it for the sake of time. We're running about 30 minutes into the show, so let's dive in. Unknown to most Americans is the fact that the first motion picture camera was invented by Thomas Alva Edison in East Orange, New Jersey. He was a lifelong inventor, and Mr. Edison had over 1,000 inventions patented when he died in 1931. Now, that's a hell of a lot. I mean, I couldn't even imagine doing one, and this guy's done 1,000. Let me take a drink of water here. Inventing a motion picture that worked properly was the easy part for Mr. Edison. Keeping the Jews from using the camera without paying him royalties for his invention was the hard part. As soon as the German-born Jew, and you know what, I keep picking out these essays that have all these Jewish names, and I just can't pronounce the damn things. As soon as the German-born Jew, Karl Lammel, okay, I'm just going to say Lammel, it's the easiest thing to say, found out about motion pictures, he started figuring ways to exploit the new invention. Efforts by Lammel and other Jews to deprive Edison of his fees for using his cameras forced Edison and other movie makers like Dixon, Kassler, Koopman, Long, Smith, Klein, and Marion to form a protective association called the Trust. And yes, Klein is a Jewish name, so you have a Jew in that trust as well. As far as the Jews could get their hands, as fast as the Jews could get their hands on Edison's equipment, they started using it. And the trust would file lawsuits against him to stop using his patented equipment. But not to be outdone, Lammel and other New York Jews scurried around Europe in their efforts to circumvent the long arm of the trust. Cameras based on Edison's invention were smuggled in to the United States by the Jews, as well as raw film. Edison and the Trust had made arrangements with Eastman Kodak Company to exclusively produce film for it, and those who had been sanctioned to use the equipment by the Trust. Lammel and his Jewish co-racialist found film manufacturers in Europe to supply them with Kodak-like film, which was also smuggled into the United States. When the courts moved at a snail's pace or refused to stop the Jews from using his invention, the Trust would send out its own enforcement police, so to speak, which would seize and smash the equipment. As one author noted, this forced the Jews to set up an elaborate warning system. Jewish lookouts would keep watch while the Jews were filming, and when they observed the Trust police on their way, the Jews would quickly pack up their cameras and flee as fast as possible to another filming location. However, Lammel knew that while the Trust controlled most of the movie cameras, they could not get their films into circulation without movie houses. Edison and other non-Jewish filmmakers distributed their movies through numerous non-Jewish independent movie house owners across America. However, those owning the movie houses were completely independent and had no central distribution center or movie house chains. Before Edison perfected his camera, other individuals had developed a system of rapidly moving cards which depicted short scenes. The pictograph system, as it was called, was quickly seized upon by the Jews as a means of making a fast buck by developing a series of cards depicting movies of naked women or sex acts by couples. To exploit the pictograph market, the Jews used their homes and buildings in New York to set up what are called Nickelodeons, which turned useless real estate into a means of making a fast buck on this early form of pornography. And if you go over to the Blog Talk page for this program, you'll see some photographs of what a Nickelodeon was. Essentially, you would put a nickel in and stick your eyes up to this viewer, and you could watch part of a movie. My presumption is that you would see part of it, and then it would stop, and if you wanted to see the rest of it, you had to put another nickel in. I didn't live back then, so I don't know. The Jewish Nickelodeon system spread from New York, and Carl Laemmle used the Nickelodeons as a framework for organizing his own distribution system among his more than willing co-racialists nationwide. The fight, the trust, let's see here, there's probably a little typo in what I'm reading. Now, just FYI, this was written by a Christian, and so some of the perspectives are going to sound like they're like obviously a Christian had written it. To fight the trust, the Jews formed the distributing and sales company. To get the Goyim's support, Laemmle used some non-Jews to become involved and bring their movie houses and money into the venture. The non-Jew Robert Cochran and non-Jew Pat Powers merged their holdings with Laemmle. However, most of the funding for the distributing sales company, and that's called DSC, came from Jewish inventors. Laemmle had managed to get control over distribution facilities in over 300 theaters nationwide. In his drive for power over the trust and his competitors, Laemmle formed Universal Movie Distributors with Cochran and Powers. After destroying his competitors at Mutual Film Distributors, Laemmle then proceeded to use his investors to push Cochran and Powers out of Universal, and before long, he was in total control and was nicknamed the King of the Film Renters. At this point, the control of the movie industry went from the non-Jewish hands of the trust into the hands of Laemmle, Fox, and other Jews. The Jews had won the fight for the control of the thinking of the American public. The movie producers aligned with the trust felt they were producing quality movies and wouldn't distribute any less than perfect films. Laemmle didn't have that problem. And to keep the films flowing into his theaters and going through his distributors, he used every piece of junk film he could get his hands on. His motto was, the more the better. The trust simply couldn't keep up because they could not understand the Jewish mentality. The trust still kept fighting back, so the Jews decided to pull up roots in the east and head west to Hollywood, California, where there would be over 3,000 miles distance between the trust, the courts, and the trust police. From that time on, Hollywood became the motion picture capital of America, where the Jews could reign supreme. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Edison and the members of the trust felt that by producing wholesome movies, they were helping to preserve the nation's morals. However, the Jews were not governed by these standards. In the book, Walt Disney's Hollywood's Evil Prince, Mark Elliott says, unlike their early East Coast counterparts, the heads of the Hollywood studios were less interested in artistic experimentation than profit. They put on the screen what sold the most. The public was willing to pay to see films with sex and violence, and Hollywood was more than happy to make them. Now I want to interject something here. I really never have seen Hollywood produce a movie that actually had sex in it. What they call sex in most of these reviews and commentaries and articles is titillation. You know, there's never been a time when sex was allowed to be put in most of the movie theaters in this country, at least for a long time anyway. There's small private ones, of course. So anyway, by the early 20s, all that remained of Edison's trust was the issue it had raised regarding the moral content of motion pictures. The federal government kept a close watch on Hollywood, the new capital of the film industry, to make sure the movies it produced remained socially acceptable. However, Hollywood's moguls had no idea of what was meant by socially acceptable. They didn't know if their movies were moral or immoral and couldn't have cared less. The more a film made, the better it was. Whenever the industry came under attack for being morally corrupt, none of Hollywood's owners believed the problem had anything really to do with morality. The members of the trust couldn't understand that the Jews wanted control of the movies so they could promote their own social and religious agenda. In a book called An Empire of Their Own, How the Jews Invented Hollywood, the Jewish author Neil Gabler says, but one major reason Edison and his cohorts lost their hegemony was that they had misinterpreted what was at stake. They never seemed to understand that what they were engaged in much more than an economic battle to determine who would control the profits of the nascent film industry. Their battle was also generational, cultural, philosophical, even in some ways religious. The trust members were primarily older Anglo-white Saxon Protestants who had entered the film industry in its infancy by inventing, bankrolling, or tinkering with movie hardware, cameras, and projectors. For them, the movies themselves would always be novelties. The independents, on the other hand, were largely ethnics, Jews and Catholics, who had entered the industry by opening and operating as theaters. Trying to stop the Jews from controlling the distribution of movies had cost the trust $300,000 in legal fees. The Jews had been hit with 289 lawsuits. Undaunted by the action taken by Edison and the trust, the Jews kept using his equipment. In a last-ditch effort to stop the Jews, Edison and his friends organized what was called the General Film Company, GFC, as a film exchange. However, by now it was too late. The Jews had gobbled up half the market and had formed a monopoly that would thumb its noses at the goyim from the trust. After the Jews achieved complete control over the distribution of movies, they kept lowering the standards regarding morality and sex to the point where some members of Congress felt that film censorship was necessary, and they introduced legislation to create a board of film censorship. To get around the censorship board, the Jews rapidly moved to form a self-regulating organization called the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, and that's MPPDA. I don't know how I'm going to get through this saying that. A non-Jew was picked to head that group, and this was former Postmaster General Will Hayes, who had been national chairman of the Republican Party. Now, Hayes, if you ask me, I believe is a Jewish name. So we have what is it called? The wolf guarding the hen house. So anyway, the Jewish power faction in Hollywood hoped choosing a Christian to regulate the moral content of their films would improve the overall image of the industry. Apparently the guy was a Christian, but I know Hayes is a Jewish name. So he may have been just a ruse. Some members of Congress considered Hollywood not only to be immoral, but also subversive. In 1929, U.S. Senator Smith Brookhart summed up the deteriorating situation in Hollywood as a battle between competing studios led by bunches of Jews. By the late 1920s, Jews controlled most of the movie theaters in America and the means of distributing the movies. With Jews controlling the movie industry from A to Z, it was almost impossible for a non-Jew to get a break. One of those who fought the system was a man named Walt Disney. Walt Disney was born in the Midwest and learned cartoon animating on his own. His attempts to get his short subjects and cartoons marketed ran into constant roadblocks from these chosen elite who ran Hollywood. Disney was able to sell a number of animated cartoons he produced for small stipends. At that time, one of the most popular cartoons was Felix the Cat. Trying to produce a cartoon that would equal Felix the Cat, Disney came up with a character called Oswald the Rabbit. In an effort to get his work recognized, he contacted a New York distributor by the name of Margaret Winkler. Disney also produced a series of cartoons based on Alice in Wonderland, which Miss Winkler contracted with him to produce. Now, interestingly enough, I think Winkler may even be a Jewish name. Let me light this cigarette. At this time, a Hollywood Jew who had worked for Warner Brothers, Charles Mintz, was courting Miss Winkler, and upon seeing Oswald the Rabbit samples, could sense that Oswald the Rabbit was every bit as good as Felix the Cat and could make him rich. In order to get on Walt's good side and to get Oswald the Rabbit, Mintz agreed to advance Walt $1,800 and to pay him for another 18 cartoons in the Alice series. Jubilant, the Disney brothers took the deal and promptly set about purchasing a studio on Hyperion Avenue in Hollywood. Mintz had set the stage after the Disney brothers had completed the construction of their modest studio. Mintz dropped the bomb on them. He told them that due to lack of interest, the Alice series would have to be dropped, and his contract with them would have to be canceled. At this time, Mintz had been traveling between Hollywood and New York, making secret deals with his fellow co-racialist Carl Laemmle. Laemmle wanted a cartoon character based on Felix the Cat to compete with Felix the Cat. Control both sides, play him against the middle. Mintz knew Disney had already created such a character, a rabbit named Oswald. Disney, not paying much attention to the contacts that Mintz had negotiated with him, had in fact signed away all rights to Oswald the Rabbit and to all goods sold through the promotion of the cartoon. Keeping his side of the bargain, Disney produced Trolley Troubles. I don't think I've ever seen that. Featuring Oswald and faithfully giving Mintz new cartoons in the series every 2 weeks at $2,500 a cartoon and part of the box office gross. Now, Walt learned by accident that without his knowledge, known consent, or participation, Mintz had made a secret deal with Laemmle to market merchandise based on Oswald. When Walt complained, his brother Roy calmed down by telling him that the sales of the merchandise would promote the Oswald series and make him money when customers came to see the movies. Then in 1928, he and his wife went to New York to negotiate a new contract with Mintz. When they met Mintz, in typical arrogant Jewish fashion, told Disney that his advance per cartoon had been cut to $1,800. He went on to tell Disney that if he didn't like it, the cartoon production would be taken over by a Mintz front company called Snappy Incorporated, and Walt's own employees would be hired to produce the cartoons in spite of him. Walt called his brother Roy, told him what had happened, and Roy told him that Mintz, according to the contract that Walt had signed, owned all the rights to Oswald, including the name. Roy then informed Walt that the animators Walt had hired in Hollywood to help produce Oswald suddenly quit. The Hollywood Jews went straight to work for Mintz, and the non-Jews that Disney had brought with him from the Midwest did stay loyal. In desperation, Disney appealed to Laemmle about his rights, and the Jew told Disney that he couldn't help and that he would only deal with the series distributor, which was his fellow Jew, Mintz. Cut out by the Jews, Disney returned to Hollywood and created what was later to be known as Mickey Mouse. After Mickey Mouse proved to be successful, Carl Laemmle came to Disney in an effort to distribute the film. He offered to distribute Mickey Mouse if Disney would give the copyright to it. It was now Disney's turn. He turned him down flat. Laemmle and his fellow Jewish distributors of films were known as the Majors, and after he gave the cold shoulder to Laemmle, none of them would distribute his Mickey Mouse series. Being a non-Jew, Disney could not penetrate what Eliot described as the old world brotherhood. Disney then turned to another man who had a falling out with Laemmle and the brotherhood. His name was Pat Powers. Powers made a deal to distribute the series on a so-called states' rights basis to as many independent theaters as possible. Irregularities in the amount of earnings and the amount the Disney's received brought about an end to the Disney-Powers alliance. However, as much as Disney searched, he could not find a non-Jewish distributor for his productions. Finally, he made a deal with a man named Harry Cohen, the head of Columbia Pictures. Sensing the profits to be made from Disney Productions, Cohen fought off the other chosen wolves on behalf of Disney. The next problem faced by Disney, as the popularity of his productions increased, was organized crime in its effort to form and control all movie-based unions. The mob infiltrated the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, and that's IATSE, in their effort to control Hollywood. Behind the effort to control Hollywood unions were the Jews Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky. Those should sound familiar to you. Someone ought to do a show on the mob. Mike. The third man of the trio of mobsters was Charles Lucky Luciano, the Sicilian gangster who was responsible for massacring his fellow Sicilians in 1920 when they had to be eliminated in order for him to make an alliance with the Jews. Even when Disney had found distributors, he was always in need of money to cover production costs and expansion. Disney severed his dealings with Columbia Pictures and United Artists, took over distribution of Disney productions. One of Disney's most successful cartoons was The Three Little Pigs. In the original Three Little Pigs, there was a scene where the big bad wolf disguised himself as a Jewish peddler to trick one of the pigs into opening the door. As soon as word leaked out about this scene, representatives of a number of Jewish organizations beat a path to Disney to get the offensive scene removed, of course. Disney removed the scene and told the Jews that the scene was a spoof depicting Carl Lamel's continuous efforts to blow down the house of Disney. So there you have it. I never knew there was anything behind that until I read this. I need to cough. Hold on. A man named Julius Schnick of United Artists, which was distributing Disney productions, had carefully set a trap for Disney. Schnick recommended that Disney seek funding from the Bank of America and personally contacted United Artists' financial advisor at that bank, Joseph Rosenberg. The Jew gladly opened a line of credit for Disney, but never gave him enough so he could be effective, and later helped bring down the Disney empire. Disney constantly found himself the victim of walkouts by Jews he had hired or by Marxist agitators who were constantly forming unions in Hollywood. Through the unions, the Jews constantly used unions to curb the growth of Disney productions. An effort to break the control of the majors over Hollywood was made when several independent filmmakers formed the Society of Independent Motion Picture Producers, known as SMPP. I'll just say SIMP. SIMP was formed to challenge the major domination of production, exhibition, and distribution. The leading Jews in SIMP were William Cagney, Walt Disney, Mary Pickford, Edward Small, Orson Welles, and Walter Wagner. A few Jewish studio moguls who had found themselves cut out of the action by the insiders of the old world elite supported SIMP, and these were David O. Selznick, Saul Lesser, and Sam Goldwyn. The dictatorial control of the Jewish majors is described in Walt Disney's Hollywood's Dark Prince. For the most part, the majors were still controlled by the same group of men who had first broken the iron grip of the old Edison trusts. Ironically, a quarter of a century later, their success had led them to create an even more anti-competitive environment than the one from which they had desperately fled. So much so that no independent film could gain national distribution unless a filmmaker or studio dealt with one of the majors, who not only controlled the distribution networks but owned virtually every first-run theater in the country. Disney raised the ire of the majors when he publicly attended America First meetings. Now, some of you young people may not know anything about America First. Similar, perhaps, to the John Birch Society, but it goes back at least to World War II. And the aviator Charles Lindbergh was a member of America First, if I remember correctly. And we could certainly use America First today. So anyway, he publicly attended America First meetings and even stood beside Charles Lindbergh at one rally. To retaliate, the red-dominated unions kept strife going at the Disney studios. I'm going to reread that. To retaliate, the red-dominated unions kept strife going at the Disney studios. They didn't put a comma where they needed to. In the early 1930s, it was a well-known fact that the sympathies of the majority of Jews in Hollywood was in favor of socialism and communism. In the book In an Empire of Their Own, Neil Gabler talks about communist influence in Hollywood. He says, Jews had first forged ties to the parties of the left and to the Communist Party specifically back in Europe. One leading communist estimated that 50% of the party's members were Jews during its heyday in the 1930s and 1940s, and a large minority, sometimes a majority, of the party leadership was Jewish. What was true of the National Party was even truer in Hollywood, where Jews already formed a large part of the left-leaning artistic community. One member complained that 90% of the party in Los Angeles was Jewish. Ring Lardner Jr. himself, a party member, had the impression that it was well over 50%, and then somewhat like maybe two-thirds, he says. As it became apparent that the communist movement in the United States was being led mainly by Jews, Congressman Samuel Dickstein of New York, who was also an Eastern European-born Jew, took steps to protect his co-racialist. He moved to have a special committee set up in Congress to investigate those who were pouring forth documents proving that the Jews were running the Soviet Union and had killed almost 30 million Russians and Ukrainians and were the leaders of the communist movement in Europe. By calling all those who dared to criticize the Jews as being Nazi, Dickstein felt he could bully loyal Americans into silence. In January of 1934, Congress voted to establish a House Committee on Un-American Activities, that's HUAC, to investigate German activities in the United States. The bias of Dickstein was so apparent that by 1937, his anti-German and anti-Gentile rantings and ravings in Congress were drawing attention to other Jews. When he tried to get the Activities Committee mandate renewed, its measure failed. The Jews went then back to Congressman Martin Dees, a non-Jew, or Dies, I'm not sure, D-I-E-S, in setting up a committee with the same name under his chairmanship. Dees voiced the concern of the Jews in An Empire of Their Own when he said, many of our Jewish citizens wanted Dickstein eliminated because they felt he was furnishing ammunition to the Nazis and other anti-Semitic movements. By 1939, Dees' investigation of subversion in America had opened his eyes to the fact that facts uncovered by the committee substantiated the claim that Hollywood was, indeed, pro-communist, as many so-called anti-Semites had claimed. Gabler quotes Dees as telling key figures in Hollywood, I told the producers that we had reliable information that a number of film actors and screenwriters and a few producers either were members of the Communist Party, followed the communist line, or were used as dupes, and that there was evidence that the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League was under the control of the communists. Dees retired from Congress in 1944, and a fiery congressman named John Rankin of Mississippi used his influence to get the committee to become permanent in Congress. Rankin's investigations further opened his eyes to the fact that Hollywood Jews were behind the anti-moral assault on America. Rankin told the press that the information we get is that Hollywood is the greatest hotbed of subversive activities in the United States. We're on the trail now, and we're going to follow through. We're not trying to hound legitimate writers, but we are out to expose those elements that are insidiously trying to spread subversive propaganda, poisoning the minds of our children, distorting the history of our country, and discrediting Christianity. Alien-minded communistic enemies of Christianity and their stooges are trying to take control over the radio. Listen to their lying broadcast in broken English and you can almost smell them. They are now trying to take over the motion picture industry, and how... I just lost my spot. Hold on just 1 second here. Tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and take a break anyway. I think this is a good point. It's a little bit after the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and play another short song real quick. Okay, I'm back. Hope you all like that. That was Angel by Massive Attack. Where did I leave off at? Last sentence of that paragraph. They want to spread their un-American propaganda as well as their loathsome, lying, immoral, anti-Christian filth before the eyes of your children in every community in America. The Jews founded the HUAC in an effort to stifle legitimate criticism of their activities in America. And by 1945, it had gone full circle and was being used as a legitimate vehicle for patriots to go after those who were influenced by communism in trying to change the thinking of America. This gave Walt Disney and other non-Jews who had been discriminated against by the majors a chance to try to bring an end to the Jewish domination of Hollywood, and the HUAC hearings went on well into the mid-1960s. Disney and his Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals tried to break the Jewish communist stranglehold on Hollywood. As the MIA-PIA and the HUAC fought the Red Jewish influence in Hollywood, the Reds kept striking back by fomenting one strike after the other against Disney and others who opposed them. Walt Disney vowed to keep the commies out of his studio and told the press that the strikes at his studio were fomented by the communist conspiracy. Again, Elliott says, ever since Sinclair's gubernatorial campaign helped unify Hollywood's left, the Communist Party of the United States, the CPUSA, had made its presence felt by championing the rights of the film industry's workers. The CPUSA played a vital role in the Screenwriters Guild's long battle to exist, thus helping to make legitimate the industry's burgeoning union movement. By 1941, CPUSA backed strikers at Disney Studios who were fomenting trouble through the Screenwriters Guild. Most of Disney's staff walked out on strike. Pressure was brought on Disney to settle the strike by Bank of America representative Rosenberg, who told him that the effects of the strike would damage his relationship with the Bank of America. The Jewish tentacles through the Bank of America were brought bare on Disney. I'd like to interject something on right here on that. You know, that's in a way kind of like what happens in my business a lot. You know, I consider my profession a very noble profession, which is basically architecture. But banking and Jews have destroyed the business itself so much that it's just to a point where, you know, I would just wish I could almost find something else to do. I like what I do, but I just can't stand the business. It just sucks. Okay. A further attack was launched on Disney by King Features when the Jews accused Disney of being a Nazi because they claimed that there was a swastika drawn in a Mickey Mouse cartoon in a panel on June 19th, 1940. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. The swastika was in the form of two crossed musical notes. Okay? Efforts to get Disney to support Roosevelt and his Get Us Into War effort failed as long as Walt Disney kept tight control over his studio. In an effort to get Disney away from the studio, Roosevelt instructed Nelson Rockefeller to make Disney a part of a tour to South America by actors allegedly sent to counter Nazi propaganda in South America. Rockefeller had been named the official coordinator of the State Department's Inter-American Affairs Group. Roosevelt was partially concerned because of Disney's appearances at America First rallies alongside Charles Lindbergh. From all indications, Roy Disney was a part of the plot to get Walt away from the Disney studio so the strike could be settled and so Walt could clear himself of the charges leveled against him of being a Nazi sympathizer. Walt and his entourage left for South America on August 17th, and on the 9th of September, Roy Disney met with James F. Dewey and agreed to arbitration to settle the strike. When Walt received news of the sellout by Roy, he vowed to close down the studio forever, rather than have the red-dominated Cartoonist Guild run his studio. It seems that Roosevelt and the Jews had made plans well in advance to shut down Disney Studios. On December 8, 1941, the Army seized Disney Studios, claiming they had to use it as a defense station to protect Lockheed, which was nearby. Disney Studios was the only one seized by the government. His studio and production facilities sequestered by the government, Disney was now without a job. The next step in the plot against Disney was when the Naval Bureau of Aeronautics contacted him and offered him $80,000 to make 20 animated training films. The anti-Disney movie was evidently orchestrated by Secretary of Treasury Henry Morgenthau. According to Disney, he had been forced to accept that Jew, Morgenthau, and was being forced by circumstances to be used by Morgenthau to deliver political propaganda films that cashed in on the popularity of that all-American mouse, Mickey. Disney referred to his cartoon characters as captives, who were forced to perform for the Stromboli like Morgenthau. The crowning achievement of the eternal Jew, Morgenthau, was to have Disney produce a cartoon featuring Donald Duck, which openly mocked Adolf Hitler, with the title Der Führer's Face. According to Elliott, this move made by Morgenthau produced more animosity between Disney and Morgenthau, as Disney made the movie under protest. However, Morgenthau made it look like Disney approved of the project and had him give awards by Hollywood and moved more business his way. The studio was returned to Disney 8 months after it was closed. To add insult to injury, the National Council of Christians and Jews contacted Disney in an effort to get him to make a cartoon to promote unity in America. They told him that the move would depict human prejudices. Disney rejected the proposal outright and said it was a disguised attempt by the National Council of Christians and Jews to promote communism in America. This attempt to recruit him by the Brotherhood Gang confirmed Disney's view that Hollywood was being consumed by communism. In response, he set out to make battle plans to counter their moves and to recruit soldiers for the fight against the Reds in Hollywood. One of the first moves he made was to help found the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals in 1944. He was a co-chairman of the organization, and among its members were Robert Taylor, John Wayne, Gary Cooper, Ward Bond, Charles Coburn, Adolph Menjou, Hedda Hopper, and 65 other key Hollywood personalities. As vice president of the Motion Picture Alliance, which is the MPA, Disney wrote to Senator Robert R. Reynolds and called on the House Committee of Un-American Activities to investigate Red influence in Hollywood. In his open letter of March 7, 1944, Disney said that Hollywood had been coddling communists and those with un-American beliefs. Having been denied access to the power and profits of Hollywood by the Jews and communists, Disney felt it was time to strike back. Both Disney and the Jew Samuel Goldwyn had been cut off from full market access by the Big Five, who controlled most of the theaters in America. That was Paramount, Loew's, Warner, 20th Century Fox, and RKO. When the Fox-owned T&D Theaters insulted Goldwyn when he wanted to exhibit his movie Up in Arms, Disney joined with Goldwyn in trying to break the hold of the Big Five over film distribution. They rented the El Patio nightclub to review the movie, and then all hell broke loose. The power of the Big Five was evident when the Reno County Commissioners issued multiple violations for the El Patio, and the fire department said it would prevent the showing. To appease the Big Five, the proceeds of the showing had to be contributed to the Red Cross. Now, that's a very common tactic. You start getting groups of people together in large numbers, they'll figure out a way to interrupt your meetings, prohibit them from happening, and ultimately keep them from ever happening again. It's a tactic they use over and over and over again. I'm going to cough. Legal action was taken to break up the Big Five monopoly by SIMPP, and in the case of the United States of America versus Paramount. The Supreme Court ruled that the Big Five were prohibited from expanding their holdings and control over the production, distribution, and exhibition of movies. A small victory for Disney, but a victory nonetheless. The actions of Disney, the SIMPP, and the handful of patriots in Hollywood led to the House Committee on Un-American Activities investigating hundreds of Reds in Hollywood, most of them being Jews. A number of the most notorious Reds were blacklisted by Hollywood movie makers because of fear that the House Un-American Activities Committee would also investigate them. The ban on the outright Reds in Hollywood lasted until around 1965. After that, many of those blacklisted by the HUAC were back in Hollywood making movies exposing their persecution, of course. One of the first efforts by the Reds to show their rehabilitation and power over Hollywood was the movie called The Front by Woody Allen. From screenwriters to producers to actors, those involved in the movie The Front were Hollywood Reds who had been investigated by the Un-American Activities Committee and had been fired from their jobs by Jewish studio owners and producers who were afraid not to fire them. The Jewish owners of the major studios knew that to allow these named as communists by the Activities Committee to keep working would provoke the Activities Committee to investigate them as well. To circumvent this, the Jewish studio owners put a number of them on the blacklist, which kept them from working. However, as depicted in the movie The Front, most of them kept working by hiring frontmen to use their names on their manuscripts. It seems that Americans have short memories, and by the time Walt Disney died in 1966, the Jewish Reds were back in Hollywood, thumbing their noses at those who had fought so hard to bring Hollywood back under control. And I'd like to make a little note here on that. That's about the time that the movies in Hollywood really started changing. You know, my parents took me to see several good movies up until that time. There was a John Wayne movie called True Grit. That was a very clean movie. That was about 67, 66, somewhere in there. But it wasn't long, and you were starting to get movies that just were over the edge compared to what had been coming out. Now, I'm not saying they're all bad. You know, it depends on how you view them, what perspective you take. But that was a clear indicator of what was to come. Movies like The Graduate, I'm sure most of you have probably seen that, even though that's a very old movie. Anyway, I'll get back to the essay. Always short of funds, Disney found a temporary ally in billionaire Howard Hughes. Hughes had purchased RKO Studios and distribution and was also wary of the Jewish control of not only Hollywood but America. Hughes loaned Disney millions of dollars, interest-free, which Disney paid back in full. While a good businessman, Hughes was a poor movie studio manager. Perhaps when he took RKO over from the Jews who stayed on found it in their interest to break Hughes by producing flop after flop for him, and they have done recently to Columbia Pictures. Now, I don't know how old this essay is, but when they say recently, I'm not sure. In any case, Disney wanted his own means of distribution and founded Buena Vista. Hughes offered to give Disney RKO for free and also gave him a $10 million credit line with no interest rate. However, Disney's advisors soured him on the deal and he turned it down. Again, was it Rosenberg of the Bank of America who advised him to turn down the deal, fearing that in charge of RKO he would become a major challenge to the Jewish domination of Hollywood? After fighting the Jewish powers that control Hollywood, Disney became fascinated by the idea of forming theme parks. He eventually turned over control of Disney Studios to his brother Roy and devoted full time to fulfilling his theme park dream. Disneyland opened in 1955, and Walt Disney died December 5th, 1966. Walt Disney, after a long bout with he died in 1966 after a long bout with cancer. Then the battle for the Magic Kingdom began. One of the major drawbacks to Disney was the fact that his older brother Roy was also an accountant who turned manager. Roy had no vision and no courage to stand up for his convictions. When things got tough, Roy would always cave in to the opposition and even go against Walt's wishes, as happened during World War II when he moved to settle the Red Strike against the Disney Studios when Walt was out of the country. Walt's venture into the new TV phenomena in the 1950s with the Mouseketeers was successful beyond his dreams. However, Walt, sparing nothing in developing, directing, and producing the Mouseketeers, and after the expensive production, the show lost money for Disney. He kept it going because it promoted Disney products, brought the Disney concept to national TV, and he felt it would be a key vehicle for promoting his new Disneyland concept. Walt's first choice for Disneylandia, as he first called it, was Burbank. However, the attempt to build it there ran into constant trouble from City Council, which Walt felt was being influenced against him by Universal Studios. He wound up building Disneyland in Anaheim. With the Mickey Mouse Club, ABC, and the Jew Leonard Goldenson, they made their mark as a competing network. The Disney shows on ABC made it into a real competitor with CBS and NBC. Around 1960, Disney complained to Goldenson that there were too many commercials on the shows. As other Jews had done to Disney, Goldenson canceled the two Disney shows. ABC has now made so much money off Disney that they could produce their own shows, and again Disney was cut out of his share of Hollywood profits by the Jewish Brotherhood. Same old song and dance. To keep his shows on national TV, Disney approached NBC. However, Goldenson refused to let Disney out of his contract, and Disney took ABC to court. In the end, ABC turned over all rights to Disney productions and products to Walt and cut all ties with him. Now, ironically, they're the ones who own Disney now. As Disney became more absorbed in his theme park, he started shifting more responsibility to his son-in-law, Ron Miller. This caused animosity from his brother Roy, who felt that his son, Roy E. Disney, should be the future king of the Disney empire. The problem was that neither Ron, Roy, or Roy E. were really able to handle the Disney conglomerate and future events that would prove this out. When Walt died, the bulk of his estate went to his wife and the female members of this family. His brothers Roy and Raymond were left out of the will, as Walt believed that men should make their own livings and didn't need his help. In 1967, Ron Miller and Roy Disney were elected to the studio's board of directors. Since both were antagonistic to each other, two committees were formed to run the Disney empire. Roy Sr. died in 1971, opening Disney up to challenges from all sides. Some Walt Disney loyalists were appointed to key positions in the studio, and this didn't fit well with Roy E. loyalist Card Walker, who became the president of Walt Disney Productions, and Roy E. resigned from the board. However, the stock his father had given him made him the largest single stockholder. Ron Miller and his associates at Disney then proceeded to make a series of movie flops, and this prompted Roy to make movies he believed would keep the studio from going under. Advising Roy in his moves was attorney Stanley Gold, another Hollywood insider. Gold urged Roy to hire his former law partner Frank Wells. Wells had been a vice president at Warner Brothers. Roy felt he was in good hands with what studio employees called the Trioca. As soon as he was in place, the Jew Frank Wells recommended that the studio hire Michael Eisner to replace Ron Miller. Eisner had been the president of Paramount Pictures and had been recommended for the job by another Jew, Barry Diller, who was the chairman of Warner Brothers. Seeing discontent at Disney, the Jew Saul Steinberg felt that Disney was ripe for a corporate takeover. Using rumors of discontent, the Jews drove Disney stock down almost 50%, causing a near panic at the studio. Roy E.'s stock fell from 80 million to 50 million. Roy was advised that a corporate takeover could be fought and that the junk bond king Michael Milken was the man to save Disney. He was hired by Roy E., Gold and Wells without the knowledge of the other board members. Roy E. had wanted to purchase back most of the Disney stock to stop the proposed junk bond takeover. However, the Jews at the Bank of America advised him that Steinberg could raise so much funny money that Disney would not be able to do so. At this point, corporate raider Ivan Boesky entered the fray and made millions on the stock based on inside information he had received from Jewish insiders at Disney. The Jews were now in a position to completely take over Disney. The Jews at Disney convinced the board to pay what is called Grimail to Steinberg, and he was given a $31 million payoff to call off his fight to take over Disney. Roy E.'s Jewish advisors came out on top, taking control of Disney, while Roy E. was paid off by being made chairman of Walt Disney Feature Animations at a yearly salary of $850,000. Gold convinced Roy E. that Ron Miller was responsible for the decline at Disney and that he should be replaced. Miller was asked by the board to step down, and on August 17, 1984, the board asked Miller for his resignation. He resigned, and his seat was taken over by the Jew Stanley Gold. The Jews had effectively eliminated Disney heir apparent Ron Miller, and now they started moving more Jews into Disney. On September 22, 1984, the board of directors appointed Michael Eisner and Frank Wells to head Disney Productions. Eisner then brought another Jew, Jeffrey Katzenberg, over to Disney from Paramount. Katzenberg's job was to revamp Disney Studios. All Disney loyalists were considered by the self-chosen to be dead weight, and over 400 were fired and replaced by a hand-picked team of Jews from Paramount. Former Morris Agency employee David Hoberman was put in charge of Disney subsidiary Touchstone Pictures. Richard Frank was recruited from Paramount to revitalize Disney's television interests. Jews had now taken over control of Disney. They used the Touchstone and Miramax to make racy and un-Christian movies that Walt Disney would never have allowed at his studio. Although gays were prohibited from activities at Disneyland while Walt was alive, after the Jewish takeover, Eisner openly invited and courted homosexual groups to hold dances and events at the theme parks. As we go to press for this article, a number of magazines have carried the news articles gloating over how Disney would be turning in his grave if he knew what had now happened to his theme parks and movie productions. From the very beginning, Disney was considered a goy outsider by the Jews who stole from Thomas Edison. They had defied the goy Edison, and by their tenacity had beaten him. They blocked out Disney because he wasn't one of the self-chosen, and Disney had to fight his whole life to break into the closed Jewish society called Hollywood. Disney didn't like Jews and used every means at his disposal to counter them. According to Eliot, Disney at an early age had been informed by his father about the self-chosen and how they operated. For a while, Disney was able, through the House of Un-American Activities, to root out these Jews and non-Jews in Hollywood who had supported communist causes. At least for 15 or 20 years, he had his revenge. While Disney was alive, the Magic Kingdom remained in good hands in spite of his spineless brother Roy. His self-chosen heir, Ron Miller, proved to be no match for Ray and the ruthless Jews who became his close advisors. Disney, who was the descendant of Crusaders who left their village of Isgny in 1066 to fight the good fight, fought the good fight all his life. While alive, he managed the ramparts and, like the Crusader ancestors, fought off the Antichrist Jews. However, despite his efforts, he could not defeat the Jewish forces who made up the Antichrist kingdom called Hollywood. The Jews may gloat while they savor their victory in storming and taking the last Christian stronghold in Hollywood. However, he who laughs last laughs best, and the time will come when Walt Disney will have his victory over the self-chosen. Well, that's some optimism that may be hard to achieve by this author. I'm going to go ahead and play another song, and I'll come back right afterwards. Let's see here. We'll play about some Black Label Society. Okay, I'm back. Well, I've got a list here of actors who have changed their names, so you have no idea that they're Jewish. As they get older, you can spot some, and of course, you know, there are some that are blatantly Jewish. They just can't hide it. But I thought I would just run through this little list here, and maybe you'll recognize them. Hopefully most of you are old enough to recognize some of these names. The listeners who are older will definitely recognize some of them. I mentioned earlier a show called Green Acres. I've been watching this show here lately on one of the stations that we have here is one of the, like a .2, like you got the main station, then a .2, whatever, it's digital. And I leave the TV on generally when I'm going to bed, and they show old movies and old reruns, stuff they don't want you to see, so you don't know how life used to be in this country, politically correct stuff, etc. And there's this one guy named Eddie Albert in there, and he's playing a man who moved from the city to live on a farm, and his wife is Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I believe she is Jewish as well. And of course they both pretend to be white, and of course all the actors in the show itself are white, but they're all a bunch of country hicks. And so anyway, I never knew that Eddie Albert was a Jew until I found this list one day, but his real name is Eddie Heimberger. Anyway, that was one of the shows I mentioned too that makes fun of white people. Now I don't know about the Beverly Hillbillies. I don't think the people playing any of those roles were Jews. However, I believe the writer of that show, Max Baer, the one who played Jethro, he might have been a Jew. I don't know. But nevertheless, here we go. Joey Adams. His real name is Joseph Abramowitz. Woody Allen. His name is Alan Konigsberg. Lauren Bacall. Everybody ought to know who she is. Joan Persky. And most people have heard of Jack Benny. Well, his real name is Benny Kubelski. An old guy some of you young folks may not know of is Milton Berle. Well, his real name is Milton Berlinger. And some of you ought to know who Ernest Borgnine is. His real name was Ephraim Borgnine. There you go. Some couldn't hide it. George Burns, the cigar-smoking old man. His real name was Nathan Birnbaum. Somebody named Joan Blondell. I don't know who she is, but her name is Rosebud Bluestein. Joyce Brothers. Her real name is Joyce Bauer. And everybody's heard of Mel Brooks. Well, his real name is Melvin Kaminsky. And Joey Bishop. Well, his real name is Joey Gottlieb. And I believe everybody knows who Charles Bronson is. He passed away here, a year or two ago. His real name is Charles Baczynski. And Rona Barrett, her real name is Rona Bernstein. Somebody named Sid Chris, I believe I've said that correctly. Their real name is Tula Finklia. Damn Jew names. Tony Curtis, whose daughter is Jamie Lee Curtis. His name is Bernie Schwartz. Joan Crawford. Her real name is Lucille de Sueur. Dylan Cannon. Well, his real name is Samile Friedison. And everybody has heard of Kirk Douglas, you know, the one whose son is Michael Douglas. Well, Kirk's real name is Isidore Dembski. Now, could you imagine that name on stage or a film, and trying to promote a film with that name? And of course, we all know of Bob Dylan, who is Robert Zimmerman. And Rodney Dangerfield, real name was Jacob Cohen. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. You young ones probably never heard of him. Douglas Ullman. Joey Gray, who is the father of Jennifer Gray. His real name is Joel Katz. Elliot Gould, his real name is Elliot Goldstein. And Zsa Zsa Gabor is Sarah Gabor. John Garfield's real name is Jules Garfinkel. Judy Garland. I think we all know of her as the one who played, what's that, 1930s, I can't, my mind just went blank. Her real name was Frances Goom, and yes, she was Jewish. Follow the Yellow Brick Road? Okay. Paulette Goddard. Her real name is Paulette Levy. Eddie Gourmet. His real name is Edith. I can't pronounce it. Edith Gormazano. And everybody has heard of Cary Grant. His real name is Larry Leach. Lauren Green played on Bonanza. His name is Chaim Leibowitz. Now can you picture Chaim Leibowitz on a horse? Judy Holliday. Her real name is Judith Tubin. Leslie Howard. Her name is Leslie Stainer. Buddy Hackett. His real name is Leonard Hacker. Jill St. John. Her real name is Jill Oppenheim. Danny Kaye. David Kominsky. Alan King is Erwin Nyberg. Larry King is Larry Ziegler. Tina Louise is Tina Blacker. Everyone has heard of Ann Landers. Abigail Van Buren is her sister. Okay, well, Ann Landers' real name is Esther Friedman. Dorothy Lamour. Her real name is Dorothy Kalmeyer. Michael Landon. He was also on Bonanza, the young one. His name is Mike Orowitz. Steve Lawrence is really Sidney Leibowitz. Hal Linden is really Hal Lipschitz. And everybody has heard of that stupid son of a bitch, Jerry Lewis. I don't know how anybody thinks that SOB is funny. His real name is Joseph Levitch. I think this might be a typo. Carl Maiden. It's probably Carl Malden. Real name is, well, maybe not. Maiden Sekulovich is their real name. Ethel Merman. Her real name is Ethel Zimmerman. Jan Murray is really Murray Janowski. Walter Matthau. Everybody's heard of Walter Matthau. His real name is Walter. Oh, you're gonna love this one. All right. How many letters? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It's about 20 letters in this name. Walter Matus Chanskayeski. Okay. I hope we caught that. Lily Palmer. Her real name is Maria Pizer. Jan Pierce is Pincus Perlmuth. And Roberta Peters is Roberta Peterman. Eleanor Parker is Ellen Friedlob. And I believe everybody knows who Joan Rivers is. Joan Kolinsky. Tony Randall, opposite Walter Matthau in The Odd Couple. Sidney Rosenberg. Edward G. Robinson. His real name is Emmanuel Goldberg. Dinah Shore. Her real name is Fanny Rose. And we all know that lush Shelley Winters, Shirley Shrift. And everybody knows Gene Wilder. Well, his real name is Joseph Silberman. So, as you can see, they're just all over. I mean, it's almost like, who isn't a Jew? Well, there's a few, and some of them fought communism. John Wayne organized a group of Christian actors to fight against the Red Stranglehold over Hollywood in support of the House Committee. Wayne formed the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. He was joined by Hedda Hopper and Charles Coburn. I believe Coburn was mentioned in that article. And Coburn became a leading member of the Mississippi White Citizens Councils. Other members included actors Ward Bond, Robert Taylor, and Adolph Menzies. On the other side, opposite the House Committee and supporting the communist writers, were Humphrey Bogart, Clifford Odets, Lauren Bacall, June Havoc, and Danny Kaye, all Jews, of course. And so it's pretty clear that who runs this industry and who's been modifying the minds of our youth for years. And they have done a good job. And the big problem is, how do we reverse this? That is the big issue, and some of that was discussed last night. I would have liked to have called into that show last night, but I really just couldn't have. I was in the chat if anybody caught what I was saying. I'll try to catch one of these roundtables coming up. So anyway, it's obvious the goal of Hollywood, anti-American, anti-white. The Jews' greatest danger to this country lies in their large influence and ownership of our motion pictures in the press, period. With it, controlling the media controls the minds of everybody. Let's see here. I've got another little article, but I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to try to quote some things out of it here. In the famous Playboy magazine interview of January 1979, actor Marlon Brando, who is a white guy, explains this phenomenon. Quote, "You've seen every single race besmirched, but you never saw an unfavorable image of the kike because the Jews were ever so watchful for that. They never allowed it to be shown on the screen." Close quote. No filmmaker dares to be critical of Jews, Israel, or Zionism. A Jewish male must always be referred to as a Jewish nice boy. A young girl is always an American Jewish princess. Jewish musicians are always considered talented, and writers are always considered gifted. Painters, sensitive. Doctors, brilliant. Jew millionaires are always philanthropic and visionary. Hollywood molds the minds of millions of innocent children of America and actually the world, and they've all been victimized by this pro-Zionist, pro-communist film propaganda. They do not realize the Jew name changers have used subtle and very sophisticated stories to manipulate the minds of our people. No nation can long remain free while such a powerful medium is totally controlled by alien Jews whose loyalty is to themselves in Zionism. I'm going to go ahead and play one more song here and finish off with some notes. I know it's already close to being end of the hour, but I wanted to go ahead and get both of them, get these songs in. I really, I said at the beginning of the show that I would try and talk as much as possible, but my voice is starting to bother me a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and play one more song for right now. And of course, that was Trent Reznor with 9 Inch Nails. Thought I would go ahead and play some music to celebrate the show based on what we're talking about. I have a few more names I want to run through here, and then we'll just go ahead and call this evening quits. Some more Jewish stars over Hollywood. Let's see here. There are hundreds of other Jews in Hollywood stardom, far too numerous to list them all here. However, the following are Jews who many think are Gentiles, but are not. Ed Asner, B. Arthur, Gene Barry, Richard Benjamin, Kevin Costner, L.J. Cobb, Joan Collins, Richard Dreyfuss, Ted Danson, Peter Falk, he was that detective in Columbo, Eddie Fisher, Harrison Ford, Richard Gere. Now, I like most of Richard Gere's movies. That's just my personal taste. Betty Grable, Sharon Gless, Steven Seagal, Dustin Hoffman, Monty Hall, Amy Irving, Jack Klugman, Leonard Nimoy, Ken Olin, Ron Perlman, George Segal, William Shatner, Peter Strauss, Rod Steiger, Jane Seymour, Barbara Walters, Deborah Winger, and Bruce Willis. The following are half Jewish: Joan Collins, Goldie Hawn, Paul Newman, Robert De Niro, and Geraldo Rivera. Some of the Jews in the music field: Billy Joel, Barry Manilow, Tony Martin, Bette Midler, Barbra Streisand, and Ringo Starr. Here are a few in the field of comedy, which is dominated 90% by Jews. No wonder most comedy sucks. Roseanne Barr, David Brenner, Sid Caesar, Richard Dawson, Don Adams, Norm Crosby, George Hessel, Alan King, Carl Reiner, Don Rickles, Martha Raye, Gary Shandling, Henry Winkler, and David Letterman. All names we should recognize. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and finalize this show. So what happens if we don't prevail over these tyrants? Okay, well, I'm going to close with some final thoughts and play the last song. Anti-Semitism is a disease. You catch it from Jews. Free men aren't equal, and equal men aren't free. Jesus loves you, but Odin says grow the fuck up. Distinct peoples have a right to remain distinct. Multiracialism is not self-government. Forced association isn't freedom. 1488. So until next time, hail Satan.